The streets of the city were always alive with the hum of traffic, the clamor of people hurrying to their destinations, and the ever-present rhythm of urban life. But amidst the noise and chaos, there was one figure who seemed out of place, lost in the shadows of the bustling city. An emaciated dog, its fur matted and dull, its bones visible beneath its thin skin. The dog's eyes, once bright and full of life, now looked like faded pools of sorrow. He had wandered into the city some time ago, drawn by the scent of food and the noise of human life. But what awaited him was the cold, indifferent streets that swallowed up anyone who was too weak to survive. His stomach ached with hunger, his body shook from the lack of warmth, and the harshness of the world seemed to weigh down on him like a crushing burden. His name was not known yet, but the people who passed him by on the busy streets started to notice him. At first, they avoided him, stepping around him as though he were nothing more than a piece of discarded trash. But then, a few of the more compassionate souls couldn't ignore the suffering in his eyes. They would glance down at him, a flicker of pity crossing their faces before they hurried on, too afraid or too busy to do anything. It was a Wednesday afternoon when a woman named Emily noticed the dog. She had been walking her usual route to the subway station, her mind lost in the rhythm of the day's stresses, when she spotted the dog sitting near the curb, its fur coated with dirt, its ribs painfully visible through its thin coat. Something in the pit of her stomach twisted. "Poor thing," Emily muttered, slowing her pace. She knelt down cautiously, not wanting to frighten him, but wanting desperately to help. The dog lifted its head slowly, its eyes locking onto hers for a moment. There was an unspoken understanding, a silent plea for help, in the depths of those eyes. Emily's heart broke. She hesitated. She had a full day ahead, and she wasn't sure what she could do for the dog in such a busy city. But something about him, the way he looked at her, pulled at her. She had to do something. She reached into her purse and found the half-empty sandwich she had packed for lunch. With shaky hands, she tore off a small piece of bread and extended it toward him. The dog sniffed the air, his nose twitching, but he didn't move. It was as if he had forgotten what it felt like to trust someone, let alone accept food. "Come on," Emily whispered softly, kneeling lower so that she was on his level. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just eat something, please." After what felt like an eternity, the dog finally took a step forward, slowly sniffing the bread before gently taking it from her hand. His mouth worked slowly, as if he hadn't tasted food in ages. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she watched him eat, each bite a small victory. She knew it wasn't enough, that he needed more than just this small piece of bread, but it was a start. But Emily also knew that this wasn't a long-term solution. The street wasn't safe for a dog like this, and even though she wanted to take him home, she knew she couldn't. Her apartment wasn't pet-friendly, and she had no idea what the legalities of taking in a stray dog in the city were. As she sat there, watching the dog finish the bread, her mind raced for solutions. There had to be something she could do. Then, she remembered the local animal shelter. She'd heard about it before but had never visited. She didn't know much about it, but she knew it was better than leaving the dog on the street. The dog, finished with the bread, licked his lips, and his gaze met hers again. Emily swallowed hard, knowing what she had to do. "I'll get you out of here," she promised, as much to herself as to him. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, quickly searching for the shelter's contact number. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a voice on the other end answered. "Hello, Lucky Paws Animal Shelter, how can I help you?" Emily's voice shook as she spoke. "Hi, I've found a dog. He's really sick and hungry. I think he's been living on the street for a while. I don't know what to do. Can you help him?" There was a pause, and then the voice responded in a calm, reassuring tone. "Don't worry, we can help. Bring him in, and we'll take care of the rest. We're open all day, and we'll have someone available to help you get him to safety." Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you so much." She hung up the phone and turned her attention back to the dog. He was still sitting there, looking up at her as though waiting for her next move. She knew she couldn't just leave him there to wander the streets any longer. "I'm going to help you, okay?" she whispered softly. "Let's go." Emily didn't waste any time. She stood up and, despite her initial hesitation, moved closer to the dog. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the exhaustion of days, or perhaps weeks, spent fighting for survival on the cold, hard streets. His body trembled slightly as she reached down to gently coax him to his feet. For a moment, the dog simply stared up at her, his ears drooping, his tail a limp brush at the back of his legs. Then, as if deciding that he could trust her just a little bit, he stood up and took a few wobbly steps forward. "Good boy," Emily whispered, her voice soothing, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. The dog had suffered far too much, and she wasn't sure how long it would take to earn his full trust. But this was a start. She crouched down and gently attached the leash she'd grabbed from her bag to his collar. His collar was old and frayed, much like the dog himself. Emily wondered if anyone had cared for him in the past, or if he had always been alone. She gently tugged on the leash, and the dog followed her, though his steps were slow and unsure. It was almost as though he had forgotten what it meant to walk on a leash, as though he hadn't known the comfort of a stable life for far too long. But Emily stayed patient, walking beside him, offering him soft reassurances every few steps. The busy streets of the city were full of the usual noise, honking horns, chatter, and the distant hum of trains, but for Emily, everything seemed to slow down. The world faded to the background as she focused solely on the dog at her side. It was as if, in this moment, the city didn't exist. Only she and this fragile creature mattered. The walk to the shelter felt long, though it was only a few blocks. She glanced down at the dog every so often, watching his hesitant movements, the way he still seemed unsure of the world around him. But there was something in his eyes, something that sparked a faint glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Emily to believe that he might have a chance at a better life. When they finally reached the shelter, Emily was relieved to see a warm, inviting sign hanging above the door: "Lucky Paws Animal Shelter. Every pet deserves a second chance." She pushed the door open and was immediately greeted by a friendly woman behind the front desk. Her name was Lisa, and she had a gentle smile that seemed to reassure Emily. "You must be the one who called," Lisa said, standing up and coming around the counter. "Let me take a look at him." Emily stepped forward and gently allowed the dog to sniff the air inside the shelter. He looked around, as if unsure of this new environment, but at least he seemed calmer than before. Lisa crouched down to his level, her voice soft and inviting. "Hey there, buddy," she said, her hands moving slowly, offering a treat from a small jar she had on hand. "You're in good hands now." The dog hesitated but then sniffed the treat, then accepted it, chewing it slowly as though he had forgotten the pleasure of eating without fear. Emily felt a knot in her chest loosen. The shelter had already provided him with more comfort than he had experienced in weeks, perhaps months. "Let's get him settled in," Lisa said, offering Emily a reassuring smile. "We'll get him checked out by our vet and make sure he's healthy enough for a good meal and some rest." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the situation finally begin to sink in. She had done everything she could, but there was still so much that this dog needed to heal. As Lisa led the dog away to a nearby kennel, Emily's heart ached. She knew this was only the beginning, but it was a crucial step. She watched as the dog was placed into a small, clean kennel with soft bedding, his head swiveling around, taking in the new space. For the first time, there was a semblance of safety in his eyes. It wasn't the street. It wasn't the harshness of the world he had known for too long. It was something better, a place where he could recover, even if only for a little while. Emily felt the pull of the door as she turned to leave, but before she could step outside, she paused and looked back at the dog one last time. "You're going to be okay," she whispered softly. The dog, as if sensing her words, gave a small wag of his tail. With a deep breath, Emily left the shelter, but she couldn't help but wonder what the next step in his journey would be. Would he heal? Would he find a new home? The questions lingered in her mind as she walked away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in a long while, the dog had hope. Weeks passed since Emily had left the shelter, and the dog she had found on the streets had begun to change. The staff at Lucky Paws Animal Shelter had worked tirelessly to nurse him back to health. His body was still frail, his fur still thin and patchy, but his eyes, those eyes that had once been filled with despair, were starting to shine again, slowly regaining their spark. The shelter South veterinarian, Dr. Hayes, had diagnosed the dog with a mild case of malnutrition, but thankfully, no serious illnesses. With proper food, rest, and medication, he was expected to make a full recovery. They named him Charlie, a simple name, but one that suited him perfectly, gentle, like the soft breeze on a warm summer evening, and resilient, like the kind of spirit that could weather any storm. Emily visited Charlie every few days, bringing him treats, brushing his fur, and sitting with him as he gradually grew stronger. She could see the changes, subtle but significant, the way his tail began to wag with more excitement, the way his posture straightened with confidence, and how he would nudge her hand with his nose, silently asking for affection. But Emily knew that she couldn't be the one to adopt Charlie. She had a busy life, a demanding job, and an apartment that wasn't suited for a dog. Her heart ached every time she left the shelter, but she had to remind herself that she had given Charlie the chance to be saved. The next step was finding him a family that would truly care for him, one that could offer him the love and stability he had always lacked. One day, while Emily was sitting in the shelter, quietly stroking Charlie's fur, she overheard a conversation between Lisa and another visitor. A family had recently come in looking to adopt a dog. The parents, Tom and Sarah, were in their late 30s, with 2 young children, Noah and Lily. They had recently lost their old dog, Max, to old age, and after months of grieving, they felt it was time to open their hearts to a new companion. As Lisa described Charlie to the family, Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard the shelter staff mention that Charlie was available for adoption just yet. He was still recovering, and they were waiting until he was fully healed before putting him up for adoption. But the moment she heard the words, gentle, good with kids, and sweet temperament, she knew, without a doubt, that this family might be the right fit for him. Tom and Sarah exchanged looks as Lisa finished talking. Emily held her breath, trying to gauge their reaction. She had no idea if they would be interested in Charlie. After all, he was still recovering, and he was far from the picture-perfect dog that might appeal to some families. But when Sarah spoke, her voice was full of warmth. "I think we should meet him," she said softly, smiling at Tom. Emily's heart fluttered in her chest as she stood up, walking toward the family with Charlie in tow. As she approached, Charlie's ears perked up, and his tail gave a tentative wag. He wasn't the same skittish, sickly dog he had been when she first found him, but he was still shy. He was still a little unsure of the world, still learning to trust. "Hi, there," Emily said, crouching down to Charlie's level. "This is Charlie." The family gathered around, their eyes soft with compassion as they watched the dog slowly approach them. Noah, the younger of the 2 children, reached out his hand cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is he nice?" Emily smiled, a little tear slipping down her cheek. "He's a very sweet boy. He's just been through a lot, so it might take him some time to get used to you. But I know he's going to love you." Charlie sniffed Noah's hand, his tail wagging just a little more. Sarah crouched down beside him, offering her hand as well. He sniffed her hand, then licked it gently, a sign of trust, of beginning to feel safe. That simple gesture was enough to melt the family's hearts. Tom looked over at Lisa, his voice warm with certainty. "He's perfect. We'll take him." Lisa smiled, nodding. "Are you sure? He's still recovering, so we want to make sure he's fully ready for the transition." Sarah, her eyes bright with hope, gently stroked Charlie's head. "We're sure. We've got a loving home to offer him. And we know what it means to give a dog the time he needs." And just like that, Charlie had a family. It wasn't the story Emily had imagined when she first found him on that cold, busy street, but it was the best possible outcome. She watched, a quiet smile on her lips, as Charlie was gently led away by Tom and Sarah, Noah and Lily trailing happily behind. Months later, Emily visited Charlie again. This time, the reunion was filled with joy. Charlie's coat was full and healthy, his body strong and agile. He ran toward her, tail wagging furiously, his eyes sparkling with happiness. The scars of his past had not fully disappeared, but they were no longer the defining part of who he was. The family greeted Emily warmly, and Charlie, now content and full of life, bounded over to greet her. He was no longer the broken dog she had found on the street. He was a happy, playful companion, loved deeply by the family who had taken him in. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice full of gratitude as she watched Charlie chase after a ball with Noah and Lily. "You gave him a chance when no one else did. We'll make sure he's loved for the rest of his life." Emily smiled, watching the happy family. She was so proud of the little dog she had rescued, who had now found a place where he truly belonged. She knew that Charlie had gone from a life of hunger and fear to one of love and joy, a life he had always deserved but never had the chance to experience until now. Charlie had been given a second chance. And, in turn, he had given the family a gift they never expected, a new companion, a friend, and a reminder of the power of kindness.